because you want to grow, you want to expand. Listen, the entire universe is expanding. Who are we not to? Of course, we want to be in expansion all the time, and as a result, we do put ourselves in difficult situations, such as, for instance, the weightlifter putting himself or herself under a very heavy load. And now you got to lift that weight. It hurts like crazy. You may not make it. You might crush your bones. I don't know. But if I am able to lift it, and if I'm able to do that a few times, maybe I'll be champion. Hello. So awesome to be here with you all again. My name is Flavio. I'm reading Frank Baler's book, Frank Baler Finds T.H. And as I'm reading, I'm making a few comments. Frank Baler asked me to come here, read the book to you, and attempt to make a few comments that perhaps might shed some light on some of these more obscure passages, perhaps making it more interesting to all of you. This story is absolutely fascinating. We're just getting started. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You may want to subscribe to the channel so that you may be alerted as to when the next video is published with the next reading of the book and the commentaries. But the most important thing I want to communicate to you is that I am adding my own comments to the book that Frank Baler wrote, but I would love to hear your comments. So the comments that I make come from me, my own experience as a hypnotist, as a philosopher, but I would love to hear what you have to say. So in the comments section, make sure that you add your opinions, your thoughts, your feelings, your sentiments about what's going on with this story, because what we're doing here is collaborating with one another so that we can all grow and learn together. So I'm really excited to hear from you, to know from you, to understand what your understanding is of this whole thing. So this way we can all grow and learn together. Also, Frank Baler is signing a few copies of the books, which he wants to give to one person who will subscribe to the channel and make a comment in the comments section indicating to me that they've subscribed and they want to enter the drawing so that we can ship the book to you, hand signed by Frank Baler. It's just an awesome adventure what we're living through. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you and your ideas about this book. Where we have been reading, Frank went to see John and Priscilla, and they were having a conversation about suicide. It was a very intense conversation that we had in our last lesson. We're going to pick up where we left off last time on the reading. If you are following us in the, let me see here, because I marked it. If you're following us in the printed version, okay, so we're starting off at the very top of page 39 of the printed version of the book. And of course, the thing is, with the Kindle, there are no page numbers, right, as you know. So I'm reading off the Kindle just because it's easier to hold it and so forth. So Priscilla had told him, look, let the dead take care of the dead, quoting Jesus. And then Frank Baler continues, guys, obviously I'm not going to hurt myself. I'm hurting to the point that I'm not sure the body can continue functioning. But I know there's nowhere to go. What I really want is to cure the pain, and death itself is not a cure. It only adds to the pain, because there will be more regret to deal with later. So Frank is agreeing with John and Priscilla. Then here comes a really interesting part of the whole story, and I'll tell you more about this. Cure the pain? John asked. Just run back to Lyran and beg her to take you back once again. I wish it was that simple, John. Even if she took me back, the problem would only get worse. My pain is not for lack of her. Therefore, her presence in my life cannot take the pain away. This is a very, very, very important part of this story. Frank Baler was facing a profound existential crisis, something that mystics oftentimes call dark night of the soul. This is an ancient terminology that goes all the way back to the Egyptian mystics of yesteryear. And that coincided with a divorce. He went through a divorce. But the assumption, of course, is that he was the public assumption, the social assumption at the time. And this is something that Frank told me. He says, this is how he could tell immediately people who knew me from people who did not know me, Frank Baler said. Because people who did not know me would immediately assume that my pain and suffering resulted from the divorce or from losing this woman. And yes, it was unpleasant. He didn't really want the divorce. He wished things could have turned out differently, but it was a chaotic relationship, and you're going to read more about what this person did and so forth, and you're going to understand that although the separation was unfortunate, it was also inevitable just because of, the circumstances. But the point here is that the crisis had nothing to do with that. So John kind of pushes him and tests him and pokes him by saying, oh, you're suffering to the point where you don't want to live anymore? Go back to Lyran. And then Frank Baler had a moment of lucidity, a moment of clarity. And he says, look, even if she would take me back, even if I could go back, in other words, that wouldn't solve the problem because my pain does not result from lack of her. Therefore, her presence in my life won't fix the problem. And this is critical because we must understand the true nature of our problems before we can solve them. Because, as an example, to make it even more blunt, if a person has a particular disease like scorbutus, right, for lack of vitamin C, well, giving them vitamin B will not solve the problem. This is just an example. But unless we know what's missing or what's in excess, we cannot solve the problem. And this is how a lot of us end up suffering because we end up substituting. In other words, I know my gums are bleeding for lack of vitamin C. This is just an example, right? So maybe I should be taking iron, or maybe I should be going to the beach more often, or maybe I should be, in other words, that is not the cause of the problem. Therefore, you will not solve the problem. So all of the addictions, according to this view, are a misplaced attempt to solve a problem that we don't know how to solve unconsciously, right? So in my own career, Frank Baler is a hypnotist. I'm a hypnotist. In my career, I have been able to help. I've done over 4,000 sessions. And the way we've been able to help people with all kinds of problems is by helping them go into hypnosis and identify exactly what the source of the pain is so that we can remedy that. As opposed to what? As opposed to attempt to cover it up with something else that isn't going to solve the problem, leading therefore to some type of compulsion, some type of addiction, some type of anxiety. So Frank Baler quite clearly says, my pain is not for lack of her, therefore having her back won't solve the problem either. So then he says, there were brief moments, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while working or teaching a class, sometimes while jogging, when I had clarity. So here's Frank Baler suffering to the point where he no longer cares to live, and yet he says, there were brief moments of clarity. And it's interesting, the moments that he describes when clarity occurs, sometimes in the middle of the night. He couldn't sleep at that time, he told me, so there are moments of complete awareness and lucidity. Frank Baler is an avid meditator, so there were moments that he could connect. At that time, he told me he couldn't really meditate because he wasn't sleeping, he was suffering too much, there's too much anxiety, so he couldn't really meditate. But every now and then, he was able to connect, and then he would have complete clarity. And sometimes he would go for a jog in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night, and then he would have clarity for just a moment when he was fatigued physically, right? Or maybe teaching a class or working. There are moments of complete clarity and stillness and peace. But most of the time, he was crying frantically in a panic attack, suffering anxiety, that kind of thing. But there were moments of clarity. This is one such moment of clarity where he says, dude, running back to Lyran won't help because that's not the cause of the problem. So this is really critical. And it's a lesson for all of us because whenever we suffer, whenever we're not well, we need to identify what the problem is before we have a chance of solving it. All right. So during those moments, I understood that I had placed myself in a tight spot from which I could not escape. There would be nowhere to run to, no physical solution to the inner pain. I would have no choice but to seek more light or face my extinction. My soul had made this choice a long time ago, and this woman agreed to play her part in my plan. The plan was perfect and effective. It just hurt like crazy, and I had no idea how to proceed forward at this juncture. So, what Frank Baler is alluding to here is this idea of the pre-existence of the soul, right? He's aware, or he believes that before he was born, he already existed. He had ideas before he existed, and he made a plan. He made a deal with himself that in this lifetime he would place himself in a really tight spot that could not be solved with anything physical. No lyre end, no money, nothing. Nothing could solve the problem, only seeking more light. He had to place himself in a tight spot from which he could only escape by seeking more light, because he thought, or he understood, that that was his only path to receiving more light. Let's put it that way. That's what he wanted more than anything else, his relationship with God, his relationship with the divine. And so he placed himself in this situation. And when we look at the way his life turned out, we see that clearly. He would put himself in trouble, almost at will, just so that he could escape from that. And the only way to escape was by finding and, seeking and finding more light. So how I felt, and then he explains this, how I felt reminded me of a magician I had once seen on television who had placed himself inside of a safe, handcuffed, then had the safe thrown into a river. The challenge for the magician was to get out alive, and the cost of not getting out was his life. It occurred to me how all masters, at anything, eventually voluntarily place themselves in situations that can cost their lives if they fail. The lion's den, the battle against Goliath, the devil in the desert, the safe underwater were all analogous for a therapist to finding joy after losing not only the desire to live, but the very desire to fight for one's life. The very survival instinct the therapists pinch in their clients to jolt them out of their own misery was missing within me. I actually wondered how a person could heal if the very core of the being that actually heals the person is no longer there. I felt like the magician, handcuffed inside of a locked safe underwater. I placed myself in that awful situation by accepting absolutely unacceptable behaviors from Lyran. The constant lies, the physical violence, the little betrayals, affairs, it was all there, in plain sight. I was aware of the transgressions. I commented on them. I wrote notes about them. I asked her for dialogue and change, but I kept accepting the unacceptable. Frank, it is normal to want your woman back, she said, nodding. Priscilla said that, right? And then we go back into a discussion about the family and so forth. And this is important because it gets into a discussion about one of the prophets. But what's important here is this notion that we end up putting ourselves in a difficult situation to test ourselves. If you're if you're like a black belt in one of the martial arts, let's say, if you are an expert at anything, like if you're an Olympian, an Olympic athlete, who do you compete against? The kid in the block? No, you go to the Olympics, you go to the toughest competition, you put yourself in really difficult situations to compete. If losing can be so brutal. You look at those guys guys and ladies, in the combat sports, for instance. Some of these combat sports are very brutal, and losing a fight, in some cases, there have been people who have died. But if they win, there's glory. You see, so you put yourself up against the best of the best. to prove yourself. Well, in the world that Frank Baler lived at the time, he had to put himself in a situation that could have cost his life. And what's really interesting is that he mentions this here. Therapists kind of pinch, kind of touch on the survival instinct in their clients, right? Particularly when there's like depression or something else. We kind of work with that a little bit, because what heals the client is actually that core that we call the soul that's in the client already. We don't put that in. That stuff is already in there. We just kind of work with that, and the person comes back. What Frank Baler is saying is, what if that very thing that we use to heal the client is no longer there? How do we come back and find joy again? He thinks it's not possible. And he sees clearly how he placed himself in this situation by allowing his desire to live to be eroded by accepting the unacceptable from a woman he thought at the time he loved. Fascinating idea. What is important about this? The relationship with the woman, what the woman did? No, that's irrelevant. That's part of the story. He's just telling you some of the mechanics that got him there. It's like saying that this magician that threw himself inside of a safe, handcuffed into the river, it's like saying that the handcuffs are what's important in that story, or the safe is what's important, or the river is what's important. That's not what the core of the story is about. What the core of the story is this person believing in his magic so much that he would actually put himself in this situation. Nobody forced him there. He wanted to do this to prove himself, to prove that he was unbeatable, let's say, right? So the details of whether the handcuffs were this brand or that brand, all of that is who tied up the handcuffs, how the safe was thrown into the river. None of that is relevant. Just as whatever Lyran did or didn't do is irrelevant. She was a sick person, but that's irrelevant to the story. He knew about it, he wrote about it, he commented, he asked her for dialogue. He has dozens of journals written about the problems in the relationship, her affairs, whatever she did, right? The list goes on and on and on. Irrelevant. He says it right here. I kept accepting the unacceptable to place myself in that situation. It's like the magician say, I accepted the handcuffs. I accepted to be placed inside of the safe. I accepted when they locked the safe. Well, I kept accepting that. So now he's locked, handcuffed inside of a safe underneath the water of a river. Now we're in a difficult situation. Your magic better work or else you won't make it. That kind of thing. So what's important here is to realize that all of life is that way. When you go to the gym, because you want muscles, you lift heavier weights each time. You're proving yourself, you're increasing yourself. When you go to study something, you study something hard. When you go to work, when you do anything, you want to do more, better, bigger, because you want to grow, you want to expand. Listen, the entire universe is expanding. Who are we not to? Of course, we want to be in expansion all the time, and as a result, we do put ourselves in difficult situations, such as, for instance, the weightlifter putting himself or herself under a very heavy load. And now you got to lift that weight. It hurts like crazy. You may not make it. You might crush your bones. I don't know. But if I am able to lift it, and if I'm able to do that a few times, maybe I'll be champion. You see, there's something very special about being champion at anything. We all want to be the champion. We all do. Some of us are in denial about it, but we all want to be the champion. At the very least, we want to be the champion of our lives, and we know what it takes to be champion. Some of us are willing to face those challenges in order to become the champion of our lives. And some of us are afflicted with sometimes the pain of failing or whatever else, causes us to believe that we don't care to be the champion. But we are one big family here. We support one another. I think we all want to excel and thrive and have a fantastic life, metaphorically be the champion. You're not alone. Frank Baler says you're not alone. Let's connect and let's support one another on our road to becoming the champion that we all deserve to be. My name is Flavio. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you, to knowing you. Put a comment in the section, subscribe to the video so that we can get the next installment of these lessons, and we're going to continue studying and learning together. Blessings.